Thanks for having me, Heerdt, and thanks for doing this. Well, thanks everybody for joining as well. I'm excited to be here. So we're going to talk about what's new and what's coming soon in Power BI. We'll cover a little bit of what happened already. We'll cover things that will come. So, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to use the chat. I'm monitoring the chat in the meeting as well. So if you have comments or questions while we go, there will also be time at the end to discuss. But if you have questions right away, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as much as possible. So a little bit about me. You might look at your screen now and go like, wait, I know that guy a little bit. Well, you might never have seen me in person, but yes, you might know me from the Power BI blog or from the general Power BI community, maybe some events that we've shared together, or if you're active on social media, on Reddit, LinkedIn, Twitter, on our community website, you might have seen my my ugly mug somewhere. I'm a senior product manager or program manager. The title has changed recently on Power BI. So in Power BI, there's two teams you might know. There's the Power BI CAT team and the product team. And it's good to understand the difference between the two. The Power BI CAT team is the Power BI Customer Advisory Team. So CAT, C-A-T, Customer Advisory Team. They are really the external facing people that go work deeply with a select group of customers. They also do a fair amount of public speaking. They collect user feedback. They synthesize that, like they group it together. They count, for example, how many customers have asked for feature X, Y, Z, and then they have regular meetings with the product group to discuss that feedback. New things, new signals they hear, recurring feedback, issues that have come up recently. And I'm part of the second group. I'm part of the product group. Now, the product group are the ones that make the decisions on the software. The product group consists of program managers and software engineers. The software engineers write software. They actually type in the code that gets compiled into the version that you use in the servers or on your mobile or on the desktop, the Power BI version. And the program managers, of which I'm one, are more on the functional user side. So we try to describe what the features, what the things should do. I don't write any software. I do sometimes, but I don't write any software that actually makes it onto your machine, which is a good thing, because I'm not a software engineer. I can script a little thing, but not like actual production ready code. But I write documents, presentations, Word documents, outlaying like the plan for a feature. Why do we need to build this? What should it do? What should it look like? How should it work? I get a lot of feedback from customers directly, from the community, from the CAT team, and all of that goes into thinking about what a feature should be doing. So that's a little bit about me. You can find me at jpowerbi on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on this email address. So feel free to reach out if you ever have any need for that. Also, why is there September 2022 in that slide deck in the bottom? I don't know why it's there. Anyway, I don't know what happened here. It doesn't really matter. So also, it's good to know that I own the DAX programming language that you might know, and I also work on the modeling space. So I'm not, we have multiple program managers. Luckily, I'm not the only one. There's multiple of us. So we have people working on the visualizations, on Power Query, on the servers, how that works, right? So on the Teams integration, all the other things that we're doing. I work on DAX, so any new functions and changes in DAX is my area, as well as on the modeling space. So that's kind of where I am. Okay, so for today, I wanted to cover a recap of what happened in the Power BI space for 2022. And I also wanted to cover what's coming. And also I wanted to briefly touch upon how can you stay on top of what's coming? Because, we already mentioned it at the beginning. Power BI develops very quickly. We release every month a new version of Power BI Desktop, and then we also have a blog post of which I have been the author for a while. But also next to that, we release almost every week a new version in the service. And that's a crazy speed. Every month, every week, we release new stuff. We fix stuff, we improve stuff, we change stuff. For us, that is our bread and butter. And for us, it's already very hard to get an overview and keep a track of everything that's happening. And that's our work. That's our full-time job to do this. Now, for you, that's not your full-time job. You have a job in which you happen to use Power BI, or you happen to like Power BI a lot, and maybe you use Power BI daily, but still it's not your job to be part of Power BI. Your job is somewhere else, and you use Power BI. Not saying that's not important, because you're hugely important, because without you, there would be no Power BI, there would be no job for me to work on Power BI. So, but what I'm trying to say is that it's very hard to keep track. So we should definitely cover that as well. Like, how can you keep track best? So a little bit about 2022. Here's a summary of what happened in 2022, what we released. So, a couple of things to just mention. Power BI Data Marts was first provided to the public, right? In 2022. We started on our Azure AS to Power BI migration, right? So Azure AS is analysis services in the cloud. We are now working towards making Power BI a superset of Azure analysis services. And that's something that that's what we started in 2022. It hasn't finished yet. We still have a long way to go. PowerPoint integration. So you can now add your Power BI reports as live data into your PowerPoint, which is really cool. So no more screenshotting, no more links to go open this report somewhere else. You can actually just take the report and make it live into your PowerPoint presentation that you're showing to your audience. Changes on the paginated report. So for example, it's now part of Pro. So you don't need a premium license anymore to get access to paginated reports, which is a huge change that you might not even notice and you might have missed. You can now access paginated reports using a Pro license. Okay, great. Field parameters, another interesting, and I will share the deck, and all these links go to exactly the announcements. Field parameters are a way for you to change what's being shown on the visual. So for example, let's say you have a business need where you need to compare the sales in a region or a country or a product group, and you don't want to build 3 charts to show sales by region, sales by country, and sales by product group. But instead, you can now, using field parameters, give users a way to switch out that item. So what happens here is basically a field parameter is a variable, if you will, a parameter that you put on the axis. So let's call it my field. You put my field and sales on the chart. And then by default, for example, my field is set to country, right? So it will by default show country and the sales in that country, in those countries. Now, if you wanted to see regions, or if you wanted to see product lines, only thing you have to do is then change the value for my field to product lines or regions. And that way, your users can easily change the chart, which is a huge benefit for flexibility for users consuming your reports. Something you might have missed, right? Metrics, another great thing that we recently introduced. I don't think it was new in 2022. I think it was introduced before 2021 or 2020 even. But we just, keep building there. Quick measures. NLP, we quickly talked about ChatGPT just a second ago. So NLP is natural language processing. So quick measures and NLP is basically our suggestions. So what you can do now is in Power BI, you can ask a question, not using Q&A, but you can type a question, and then Power BI will generate a DAX measure for you. It will suggest a DAX measure. Using natural language processing. So we use GPT under the cover, which is the same, precursor to the GPT version that's currently in ChatGPT. So expect more from us in this area as well. And we're currently experimenting with that. One thing I want to call out about this feature, it is very important to remember, as with anything, with GPT or chat or natural language processing, it's a suggestion. There is no It's not right or wrong. It's not black or white. There's no guarantee that the DAX we generate, that the answer the machine gives you based on the input you gave, is absolutely correct. That's why we call it suggestions, not oracle, not truth. It is a suggestion, right? Case in point. Just now we saw a screenshot where my name, or my nickname, the Dutch Data Dude, has been linked by ChatGPT to Marco Russo, which you might also know as a very famous person in the DAX ecosystem. Well, when I did that yesterday, exactly the same question, it told me that correctly that I'm the one that carries that name, the Dutch Data Dude. So whether or not this is because I came in with a different context and Vahid had a different context and therefore got a different answer, or he asked the question slightly differently, maybe, doesn't matter. It shows that the output of such a machine is very dependent on factors that you might not be aware of, and hence cannot be trusted with your life. For our quick measure suggestions, same thing. It's great that you can get DAX generated. However, there's zero guarantee that that DAX is correct. You should always validate the DAX that it generates. You should always look at it and go like, does this make sense? Does this actually do what I'm asking it to do? So it's a great learning tool, but please, 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 please validate what it generates. B2B sharing, interesting. So, when you work across companies, it's now easier to share data sets between those companies without lots of trickery, without having to add those people that work at the company that you wanted to share the data with as a guest in your Active Directory tree. You don't have to do all of that. You can now just share directly, which is a great improvement. Then on the mobile side, we have a couple of interesting things that happen there. Absolutely, mobile is like the Power BI mobile app is one of the, if not the highest rated business intelligence mobile app on the planet. And data in space is interesting because that allows you to show data on like AR, so augmented reality, not HR, but AR. So for example, in the HoloLens, like you're walking around with other AR device, you can now plot the report in space. So if you have an elevator, you can plot the report about that elevator right next to the elevator. So if you have such a device, you can immediately see the data with the actual physical device you're currently looking at. Another one, data refresh cancellation, right? So if you have data published to the service, you probably will have a refresh scheduled there to keep your data up to date. You use a gateway to get the latest version of the data, put it into the data set, make sure it happens every, let's say, couple hours or every day or whatever, what have you. You can now cancel that. Sounds like that's something that should have been there from like years ago. But it's those little things that sometimes are very hard to create, and you might not appreciate how hard it is to build those kind of things. And that's why sometimes things that seem very simple takes us a long time to build. So there's in the gateway support for VNets, data sort management, so loads of improvement there. Then in direct query, we have improvements in performance, so horizontal fusion, which is a pretty technical topic. I'll be light on it, but basically it means we try to optimize more for the query execution. There's a couple new functions that we added, and of course this is just a selection, right? The whole list of everything that we did in 2022 is so long, it would take me like an hour to talk you through all of that easily. And then I would only be able to say like one or two things about everything. DevOps, on-demand data set loading, hybrid tables, very interesting, where you can have your tables in hybrid mode, so you get data optimized performance there. If you wanted to keep track of what has happened, you can always look at the Power BI release plan. The link is there, which is basically when did we release what, and if we tell you upfront in the release notes that something is coming, this will be included here. So you can look at every month to go like, hey, this is what's coming up. And whether that is in public preview or in general availability or has been released right away, that's something you can look at. Just to explain a little bit how this works. So when we build new features, those features first, of course, are like living internally at Microsoft within the team, right? We build them, we test them, we try them, we scrap them, we start over multiple times until we have something that actually works. At that point, when we feel comfortable going outside of our immediate group, which sometimes is 4 or 5 people the size that work on one feature, we go into private preview. Private preview means we invite select people from the community, from our customers, to try this feature with us. That is all covered on the non-disclosure agreement, so you should not hear about that publicly. That's not allowed. And then after private preview, which depending on the size of the feature can take a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, half a year, sometimes it goes into public preview. And that's where the whole world gets to see. And you can try the feature for yourself and provide us feedback. However, at that point, you can try it, but it's not general available. It doesn't mean you can try it, but you shouldn't use it for production, right? If you have issues with that feature, we might not give you the support that you're used to from us for other features that have already been released. Also, during public preview, we reserve the right to change everything about the feature if we learn that, well, so far we thought it worked like this, but then in practice, when everybody tries it, it doesn't work that way, or people don't like it. So we are free to change during public preview, way easier than when something is already released. So after public preview, you can get to GA, which is short for general availability. That's where the preview stops, and that feature is usable by everybody for anything they want to do that is supported, right? So if you want to use it in production, you can rely on our support. Things about that feature won't change at the last moment. We will have to be very gentle if we wanted to change something about it. So we will take some time to go from public preview to general availability. There are features that have been in public preview forever, for example. And otherwise, sometimes we don't bother with all of this. Sometimes we just know that a feature is something that people have been looking for. And then we might just immediately jump from private preview, or not even private preview just before, to immediately to release. So we skip this private preview, public preview, general availability schedule steps. We just immediately go to release. So that's another option that you see here in this report. So this is the great report that the link is in the chat now, that you can use to keep track of what's happening. But again, this was just a recap of some of the things that we did in 2022. We get a monthly update on the blog. We get weekly, sometimes updates on the service. So the whole thing, we have one slide that is animated that shows exactly everything that we did each month. Is like, it just goes and goes and goes and goes. It's like crazy. The font type is type 6, I think, to just make sure everything fits on the slide. And that creates a problem because, as I said in the beginning, for us, it's our bread and butter. It's our life, our full-time job. But how do you keep track of this? So there's a couple of things I wanted to share here. Is we have a public roadmap. We call them the release notes. There's a link here on the slide. You can look at that roadmap to see what's coming for the next 6 months. So we plan 6 months ahead. Of course, there's things like general strategy that we plan for like multiple years, but when it comes to actual concrete features, we plan 6 months ahead. So that's what we share then regularly with the public roadmap. So every 6 months, there are big updates to the public roadmap. So, for example, we had we are now currently in 2022 wave 2. So that started in October 2022, and will run up and until March 2023. Thanks for putting the link in the chat there. And then from March onward, we start a next semester, which will start in April and run until October, which then we call 2023 Wave 1, because it's the first wave that started in 2023, right? The other wave was already running. And then we do the same thing again, right? So in October, there's 2023 Wave 2, and then 24 Wave 1, etc., etc., etc. So March, April, October, November are the moments you need to take into account and make sure you're aware of all of these updates that are coming in. So if you wanted to know exactly what's coming, this is where you go. There's minor changes and updates if we delay something, if we move something forward. Unfortunately, delaying is more common than moving something forward. Those changes will happen in that plan. It's not getting announced big. And there's a lot of functionality that we never get into the release notes. And the reason is multiple, but one of them is we want to keep them secret because maybe it's a competitive advantage, right? Power BI is not the only tool in this market. There's other tools that want to steal our cheese. So maybe you want to keep them secret, right? Like if we are planning to make a big investment, or I don't know, if Microsoft wants to buy a certain company, we won't go announce that 6 months ahead, right? We'll work on it, and then when it's all done and dusted, then we'll tell you, right? So what you see in the public roadmap is not everything there is. And not only is it made it be secret, there's also things that we cannot commit to timelines for, right? So if you think back about private and public preview, things are secret if they are in private preview, right? So currently I work on a lot of features that are all in private preview. I cannot tell you about it at risking of losing my job. You will not find those features in the public roadmap. However, the moment we remove them out of public preview, private preview, or when we feel comfortable opening up about them, and we have a timeline, then they go into the public roadmap. So also some things that you might know are coming, but don't have a definitive date when they will be released, will not be in the public roadmap, right? So for example, if something is moving about, let's say direct query on Power BI datasets and analysis services is a feature of mine. We don't have a set date for that when that's ready. So that's why the general availability of that feature is not in the public roadmap, because it's moving too much and it would just annoy everybody, because you might, if we put something in the roadmap, we're relatively sure it's going to be there, so you can plan accordingly. In all, maybe 40% of what we actually do is in the public roadmap. So keep that in mind, that less than half, sometimes I've seen quarter of what we do and what we invest in is in the public roadmap. So between half and 3/4 of what we do is not in the public roadmap. So if you look at the roadmap and go like, well, that's not a lot. No, that's true, because there's a huge amount of things that are still coming that we are working on, but we simply cannot tell you about, or we haven't written down because of these reasons. And then some things get mentioned on social media or at conferences as well. That's sometimes a mistake, but most of the times it's on purpose. I have been doing that for a little bit now. Sometimes I just let slip a couple things to just see how people react, to gauge your feedback. Like for me, it's very important. If I work on a feature, for example, I've been working on a feature that I cannot disclose, but I've been working on that for like 18 months now, more than almost 2 years now. For me, it's very important sometimes to go get some feedback. So to talk about it in a very limited space, not show everything, but just a tiny little bit, so I get some feedback. So at least we know we're still on the right track, right? If we start walking into a tunnel for 2 years, it's easy to deviate from where we need to go, right? If we don't talk to anybody outside. So that's why sometimes things get discussed in social media or at conferences, very high level, but that's a PM or anybody from our product group testing if what we're planning to do is still valid for you. Okay, so if you want to keep on top of what's coming, very important for you to look at the public roadmap, and then also something that's not on the slide, be part of these kind of conversations, be in those user groups, be there, because that's where you might find between the lines things that people say that make you think about a feature that we haven't even talked about, right? I won't tell you anything that's an NDA, but if you read really closely and listen to what I say, you might be able to gauge where this is going by just thinking about it. And that's exactly the value of being in these kind of sessions as well. So please be part of that user group and be part of that community. That's the best way to keep on top of everything that's happening. Okay, so what has been happening, right? Well, there's a couple of big things here. We are going to bring Power BI to the masses by including it in the Office installer. So it is already starting with E5. That's a type of office, and will also be included in others. The goal here is to make Power BI the PowerPoint for data. Like PowerPoint is PowerPoint, right? The moment you need to write a document, everybody uses Word. The moment you need to give a presentation, everybody in the Office ecosystem knows they're going to use PowerPoint. We, as Power BI, want to be the PowerPoint for data. The moment you need to analyze some data, we want you to take Power BI. Right now, you have to know that Power BI exists or that your company has access to it. You need to install it separately, blah, 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 blah. You want to get rid of that. If you have Office, you have Power BI. It's a huge, huge, huge change for us as a group. Another thing for Power BI to the masses, web-based data set editing. That's something we're actively working on, which will allow you to make changes to data sets in the web. Currently, you can make changes to reports. You can add more data to a data set, but you cannot change, for example, you cannot add a measure in a data set in the web. You have to go use Power BI Desktop for that. Great. However, if you are on a Mac, that's not great, because on a Mac or on Linux, there is no Power BI Desktop. It's simply not there. Of course, you can install something like Parallels to get Windows and then install Desktop, but that's a hassle. So what we're doing here is we're slowly bringing parity between the web and desktop. So that means that you will see functionality from desktop appearing in the web, in the service, but also the other way around. You'll see functionality coming from the service into desktop. So there's bidirectional parity here. This does not mean, and I want to be very clear, this does not mean we're going to deprecate desktop. That's not what this is about. We're just simply making the functionality available on the web so more people can use it more easily. So right now we're doing measures, RLS, relationship editing, all of that is coming very soon. And you know, that is basically, we also learn while we redesign things for the web about new functionality. So for example, RLS editing, we learned that while redoing that for the web, we made a bunch of changes. So the version that's in the web is now also coming back to the desktop to make sure that those two things are the same, because we learned a lot of things when we built it in the web. We're also going to bring that back to desktop. So it's not only from desktop to the web, it's also from the web back to desktop. Let's see, Quick Create is an investment area for this reason of bringing Power BI to the masses that allows you to generate reports very simply. You can use view Power BI content on OneDrive. So there's loads of things here happening in the Office space that just makes Power BI readily available for more people. Other things that are coming is on-object formatting, Office-like formatting. When you think about Office, if you have an image selected, you see a toolbar. We have a format pane over here on the right? And you need to scroll through and try to find the formatting setting. That's all good. We're keeping that, but we're also adding the Office-like formatting capability, so it's easier to recognize, and it also helps people when they get Office that they see the paradigm is the same in Power BI to work with. Field parameters is something that I already mentioned in 2022, which allows you to build interactive reports easier. That's currently in preview. So that's something that's coming. And then another big one is visual improvements. We know that if you compare us to other vendors out there, that sometimes people feel that our visuals are lacking. That is all going to change. We now have a dedicated program manager. His name is Miguel Myers, and he has a big vision on where our visuals need to go. And he is schooled in actual data visualization, so he knows what he's talking about. Other than me, for example, I'm not a data visualization expert. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he has a great plan of making those changes, and those changes will come up very, very soon. And I've seen what he's going for. The future looks bright for data visualizations. It's like, if that happens, when that happens, not if, when that happens, we will easily beat our biggest competitor in terms of data visualizations. Easily. And I'm not talking about pie charts, by the way. I'm not talking about that. Just regular data visualizations, violin plots, what have you, everything will be part of it. And it looks beautiful. Very simple, very beautiful. So that's something that, keep a close eye on that development as well. It's very, very exciting. Okay, so I wanted to cover other things. New features in DAX. This is close to my heart, right? As you know, DAX is simple, but not easy. It's not an easy language. It's very powerful, but if you really want to understand what you do and what it does and how it works, you have to learn. You have to train yourself a little bit. So there's things that we want to change about that. In the long run, in my perspective, DAX should be simpler, very simple. It should be so simple that if you come from the Excel background, you can do things in DAX comfortably. And that's simply not the case. Let's face it, it's not the case today. Loads of us just copy paste something from Stack Overflow or some community website or from SQL BI, put it in desktop, hit enter and cross their fingers hoping it works, right? That's how loads of us, including myself, sometimes write DAX. But that's simply wrong, right? We lost our way a little bit. Now, of course, we have quick measures using natural language, the suggestions we just talked about at the beginning. Remember, they're just suggestions, but there's other things that we can do. And my plan, my reason why I'm on the team is to make DAX easier. That's simply why we're here, why I'm here, why there's a whole team focused on making DAX easier. So there will be loads and loads and loads of announcements coming the coming years on this, but DAX is going to get easier. The first steps are already taken, but think about, for example, something like a running sum or a moving average. If you ever tried that in DAX, in Power BI to do it, you will have noticed it's very hard to build. But in Excel, it's like drag and drop and you're done. There's 22 steps to making a running sum in Power BI. Go find it online. If you go search for running sum Power BI, you'll find the first link is 22 steps to doing a running sum in Power BI. 22. That's 21 too many, right? A running sum is such a common calculation that everybody's looking for in business. 22, really? Wow. So that's gonna change. And I'm not ready to announce anything like that yet, but this is where we're taking this. This is our grand vision of where DAX needs to go. It needs to be so simple that you can express what you want. And the DAX it generates is so easy that you can actually just say in your dreams, go like, yeah, that's probably what I need to write, or that's what I need to type, or what I need to do to get the results. That's where we're going. And the first couple functions of this that make that life a little bit easier are already available right now. Index, offset, and window. We'll talk about them in just a sec. Evaluate and log, two CSV and two JSON are also already available to help you some debugging. So you can now add evaluate and log on any DAX expression. We'll just print out the results so you can at least see what your expression is doing. But the window functions are an interesting new development. I also wanted to call out powerful authoring in desktop. Calculation groups. If you ever work with calc groups, you know that there's no authoring for them in desktop. That is now coming. So we're going to work on that. There's an optimized ribbon that is coming to allow you to get quicker query results if you work with bigger data sets. There's relationships editing in the properties pane, because if you work with query data sets, the relationships editing dialog is very slow because it has to do all the validation back onto the data source. We're going to add a version that's relationship editing in the properties pane in which that validation doesn't happen. So that's way, way faster than what is currently there today. So those are like the powerful and power users things that we're changing in desktop to get the people that are like more on the professional side of Power BI into keep them happy with what's happening in desktop. In Dial Query, we're changing loads of things. The window functions again come up here that I just mentioned. Index, offset, and window. They are also good for performance. So there's loads of things that are changing here to just get Dial Query to perform better. Sometimes you have to use Dial Query, but the best performance you will still get is, if you can, import the data into Power BI, not use Dial Query. But sometimes you have to. The data is too large, it's security centralization, the data updates too frequently. You have to use Dial Query. We just want to make sure that experience is then the best it can be. So with that, I'm going to show some demos for the DAX part for a little bit. and then we can take some questions. So let me switch over to my, that's the wrong Power BI actually. I wanted to go here first. Okay, let's do that one first. Okay, so you should see my Power BI desktop now. Let me hide some panes, so get a little bit more room. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is a data set of pizza restaurants and pizza consumption across the US. So just bear that in mind. So what I wanted to do here is I, for example, wanted to take the states. So I have a list of states in the US, right? And then I have the number of pizza restaurants in each state. And I'll show that as a bar chart real quick, right? So I have a list of pizza restaurants and the number of restaurants by state. Great. So, you know, New York is the most, etc., etc., etc. I order them alphabetically by state, so we can look at them ascending. So Washington State is here somewhere, so it has 54 pizza restaurants in Washington State, apparently, according to this data set. It's not a matter if that's correct or not, it's just an example. Okay, so what if I wanted to do a comparison? What if I wanted to say, that's interesting, but how much did the number of restaurants change between states? So if I'm looking at, for example, Washington State here, that's 54, then the next one is 40, right? Or the one before that is 58. So I want to see a bar that compares the result for Virginia and Washington and returns the difference between the two in the chart. Well, of course, you can write that using DAX, and we call that a difference calculation. So here's the expression that you have to do today to write that difference calculation. I'll let you parse it for like just a second. And this works, by the way, this works perfectly. It does return the result. And it tells you exactly what's the difference between the restaurant you're currently looking at, Washington, for example, and the one right above it. But this is not easy. To be fair, I haven't even written this. I had to rely on Jeffrey Wang, the inventor of DAX, to write this for me to make this work. It's a crazy, crazy 22-line trickery, black magic, if you will, of DAX. There's a top N1 in there with a filter statement on top of a temporary table. There's loads of craziness in here that allows you to do and get the result. I don't think there's many of us out there that can actually write this from scratch. I would argue that the number of people that can write this from scratch without any mistakes is less than 5. The two Italian MPPs, Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, that wrote the books and the trainings everywhere for SQL BI, then Jeffrey Wang and Marius Dumitru, the inventors at Microsoft of DAX, and then maybe somebody else. That's it. 5. Not more. We have millions of users. So this is useless for them. So now what we can do is we can actually think about what this actually would change if I would be able to use a window function called offset. So I'm just going to drag this to, I'm going to drag offset to the chart to show you it actually works. So now we'll see the exact difference between each state compared to the other. That was just before it, right? So for Washington State, we had 54. It was 58, so the result should be -4, right? That's the difference between the two. We went from 58 to 54, so we went 4 down, right? Perfect. So that's good. So offset allows you to express this exact same thing in 12 lines. That's from 22 to 12. I'm not entirely happy yet, right? We're just getting started, as I said. We should make this way easier still, but at least it's easier. There's only one calculator in here. There's no temporary table. There's no top N1 happening. There's no crazy black magic going on here. You can look at this expression and go like, I kind of understand what it does, right? It says, well, calculate the previous number of restaurants, where you did an offset of -1, so the one above me, where I currently am, -1, for the pizza state. So basically what it says is calculate the number of restaurants for a state, but before you calculate that, wherever I currently am, move up 1 from basically go to the previous right above me. That's what this expression does. Offset. Offset is already there. I'm sure it will be put into the chat very soon. You can take a look at it. You can use it already. Offset is already ready. It's a relative movement. -1 says go 1 up. +1 says 1 down. -2 is 2 up, right? So that's basically how this works. And then we simply take the current number of restaurants from the current state and we calculate the difference, right? I hope this explains a little bit that this life is now getting easier to do these kind of things, thanks to window functions, thanks to offset. We have more functions in window that we introduced. So we already talked about offset, which is a relative movement, right? Based on where I am, see what's before me or after me, and then take that value so I can do something with it. Calculate the difference, ratio, whatever. There's also index. Index is not a relative movement, it's an absolute movement. So for example, if you have an index value for sales or cost, and you want to compare against that baseline, you can use index. So here what I did is total sales, light blue bar, for every year. And now I also have a total sales versus baseline. This basically says for each year, find the first sales, the first year that has sales, take that value and subtract the 2, right? So what this does, if for 2018, it takes the 6.4, then it says the first year for sales is 2017. So I take the 3.7 minus 2, minus, we minus them together, we subtract them, we end up in 2.7. Same happens here. We look at 2017, we get the value subtracted from 10.4, we get 6.7. So it is not a relative movement, it's what we call an absolute movement. It moves all the way at the beginning. So this expression, let me just show you, if I can find it, here we go, uses a function called index, right? So here, can I zoom in? I hope you can see it. I can also just paste it in the chat so you can more easily read it. But basically what this does is it says, hey, if there's not a blank in total sales, that's because the data set is not very good. Calculate the total sales for index 1 on calendar year. So it basically says, calculate, again, like with offset, it's kind of the same idea. Calculate the total sales, but not for the current year, but for the first year on my chart. That's what this is, right? For the first year in the data set, calculate the sales, right? So for the first one, index 1 means the first, index -1 would be the last, index 2 would be the second, right? 2018, etc., etc. So this is an absolute movement. So if you have to compare your current value versus some year that has been set in time, that happens a lot in financial institutions, you can now use index to very simply express this. Again, index is absolute movement, offset is relative movement. We already talked about offset, but basically the same thing as before. It's very similar expression type. As you can see, it says, take the total sales, but then before you, what's this, color, right? So before you return me the total sales for white, move it up 1. So then give me the total sales for the one that's above me. I don't care what it is. In this case, it's silver. So give me that value, and then we simply subtract the 2. So offset allows you to do this relative movement. And then you have one more function, which I have 2 examples of. That's called window. And window allows you to do moving averages and running sums more easily. So window allows you to get a slice of the data, right? So for example, if you wanted to do a running sum over years, you could say, I wanted to do a running sum over the last 3 years, right? So what this does, it basically, it looks at the current year and then takes whatever value is there for the previous years and sums it together, and it keeps doing that for 3 years, and then afterwards it rolls over. So it's not a complete running sum because it stops after 3 years and then it skips the first year that originally was there. So for 2020 it should include 2019 and 2018, but not 2017. But 2019 includes itself 2018 and 2017. 2017 is just 2017. For 2018 is 2017 and 2018, right? So writing this is very hard in normal DAX. Now with the new window function, you can actually write this relatively simple. You can say, hey, the running sum for 3 years is the sum of the window for calendar year and sales. So it basically says, take a window of calendar year, and I'll explain what this does in a second, and for that, sum the sales. That's what this does. The sum X takes the total of whatever you pass in here, which is total sales, over what is this, and this is a slice of window, slice of year in this case. This slice says, from where I currently am, go 2 positions back to the left, or up if you're in the table, -2. So where I am currently, 2 positions to the left, that's the starting point. And then you end at where I currently am. 0 relative means my current position. So this will do 2019. If I'm in 2019, this value should be the total of 2019, 2018, and 2017, right? 2 years back from 2019 is 2017. That's the start of the window, and then it ends at 2019. So that's the total slice of data that you get. You can also do -2 absolute and -2 and also up to an absolute value. So for example, if you wanted to calculate a running sum from the start, instead of -2 relative, you would use 1 absolute. A little bit like index, right? Because of course, if I'm here in 2020, -2 relative only includes 2019 and 2018, doesn't include all of it, right? So if I wanted to change this to say, you know what, I actually want to include all years, so now the value should be an absolute, complete running sum. Now the value for 2020 should start including 2017, which was previously excluded. I can change this to 1 absolute, basically means start at the first one, keep going until 0 relative, which is my current position. So if I change this, we should see, there we go. Now it's an actual true running sum. It keeps moving and moving and moving upwards. It keeps increasing, right? Great. Very simple, relatively simple expression, not very simple. It still can be easier to do a running sum. Moving average, another very popular one. Same thing, we can use window. What is a moving average? Is basically taking a slice of the data and then calculating an average over it. So instead of sum, we use average, right? So here I have a moving average for 3 months. So you by now will hopefully understand the pattern a little bit, and you can see how we built this because the pattern is kind of the same all the time. It says take an average for total sales and then do a window for -2 relative. Relative is implied because it's a default to 0, which is my current position of the year, month, and month number, right? Because we have, every month appears every year, so otherwise you just get it for that 1 month. So you need to specify this with year and month name, etc. But this does -2. So if I'm in December 2017, what it will do is we'll take this November and October, and those 3 values will be passed to the average, the sales. So it will take an average and return that average. And as you can see, this is a moving average over 3 months, right? If I wanted to get a moving average over 5 months, I can do -4 and 0. This would smooth out the line even further because now it calculates it over 5 months, right? I'm going to move it back, otherwise the name isn't correct anymore. But that's a little bit about window, offset, and index. Those are already available to you. They were launched in December last year. You might not have seen them. Here you are. They are very exciting, very cool. And these are building blocks towards a way grander future that we have in mind that will make our life way, way easier still compared to what we already achieved today for doing calculations. So I hope that helps. Hope that explains a little bit about how these things are supposed to work. Did I put this back? I think so. Maybe. Okay. So with that, I'm gonna shut up and see if there's any questions that I can take. And yeah, let's see what happens.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. That was a great presentation. So if you have any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question. So there is one question in the chat. Thank you for us.
Question about roadmap. If possible, would you please describe more detail about Power BI report versioning and DevOps roadmap for report office features in the future? So, well, a couple things. You ask multiple questions at once, which is good. So versioning, let's do versioning first, right? If your reports are stored on OneDrive, which they might be if you have Power BI integrated in Office, they will end up in OneDrive easily. You already have versioning because OneDrive does versioning, right? So every time you create a new version of any document you put on OneDrive, you will have a new version. So that's our quickest way to get you into versioning. Now, I know that's probably not the type of versioning you're after. I know that Madhi here refers to something else, probably. They are probably referring to more professional versioning, or also called source control, like actual check-in, check-out procedures for Power BI data sets and reports, right? That's what I think, at least, what I read into the question, but I might be wrong. That is something that we are looking at the moment. We're considering doing. It was, to full disclosure, it was on our public release roadmap for a couple hours, which is evidence that we are actually really thinking about this and doing and planning to do this. We removed it because we weren't entirely sure about the moment it would ship. So that's one great example of what I said earlier. It's not on the roadmap because we are not entirely sure where this will ship. But yes, we are working on Git integration for Power BI. So that would allow you to do, merge, push pull, merges, diffs, etc. for the things that you're looking at in the data sets or in the reports. So that's definitely for your measured expressions and versions of your data set. That's an awesome development. And it's a Git integration, not a GitHub integration. That's important to note. Does that help? Does it answer your question? If not, please let me know.
Yes,
Okay,
thanks.
sure.
Okay.
No worries.
Okay.
Any other question?
Yeah. So if you want to turn on your video, if you want to turn on your mic and ask your questions, please feel free.
This is your chance, right? You don't get to speak to people from the product group that often. So if there's anything, any feedback, any question, anything I can help with, feel free.
Hi, this is Faumi.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation.
No worries.
And the new DAX functions are really exciting, and I really should implement them. But I've got a question on the performance. Basically, what I've noticed is it's performing well compared to time intelligent functions, whatever, Windows and all. But is there any downside or cons using these functions, or should I replace these functions with my time intelligence calculations? If there is any, please let me know.
So you're referring to index and offset and window, right? Just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think in general, the index, offset, and window functions will be performing better than your other DAX functions that you have there, with one big exception. That is doing calculations over time. The time intelligence functions exist for a reason. They will still be there for a reason, right? They are the optimized version to do these time-based calculations, right? And over time, we might actually switch how they actually work under the covers to switch them to window, for example, or to do an index or an offset under the covers, but you won't have to change your DAX. So you don't have to go change your time intelligence functions right now. In fact, I would argue that most of them will perform equally good, slightly worse maybe than the window functions. However, the DAX you write is way easier to read for those time intelligence functions, right? You have same period last year, like you more easily can write what you want. And then, yes, the performance might be slightly different, slightly worse. I wouldn't even argue it's a lot, but maybe a little bit. But the DAX you generate, the DAX you write, is easier to maintain, it's easier to understand, and that's also a lot of value. So easier to write, easier to understand, easier to read, I think is a lot of value that you can contrast versus performance. I would argue that you would see performance benefits mostly, and easy to express benefits mostly, with the window functions on things that are not time-based. That's why most of the examples that I have were not time-based. That's on purpose, right? Doing a difference between colors in a chart, or doing a difference between states in a chart, that's not easy. Time intelligence doesn't work because it needs time. Here, you can now do the same things, but then generic. You don't have to do a time intelligence function. You can just do this calculation over something that is not time, or not a date, or not a month, right? So my answer is I wouldn't change them unless you currently have performance issues with the current time intelligence functions. Then you can definitely try it with index and offset and window, but keep in mind that those functions are less easy to write, less easy to read, and less easy to maintain. Also, if you stick with the time intelligence functions now, there is talk for us to add more flexibility in the terms of the calendars, right? Currently, you're stuck to a certain calendar. We are looking at adding more flexibility for you to specify different calendars to run your time intelligence over. If you now switch to index, offset, and window, there's no guarantee you can benefit from that future improvement.
Perfect.
Long answer, but basically says stick with what you have for time intelligence.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
Okay, another question in the chat.
We have features to change the default environment of while we're using integration between Power BI, Power Automate. I'm not sure I understand the question. Could we have features to change the default environment while we are using integration between Power BI? Can you maybe explain a little bit more? Because I would like to understand, but I'm not sure if I understand the question fully.
Thanks for joining us. When we want to change environment while we are using Power BI, and we want to use Power Automate, we can only use the default environment of Power Platform, and not any feature to change the environment. Sometimes we need to connect to other environment. Is it any feature or other tricky?
So you're talking about changing the environment. Oh, sorry. Sorry for cutting you off there. So you're talking about changing the environment on the Power Automate side.
No.
Or do you want to switch from dev test to production in Power BI?
Exactly.
So in Power BI, we already have the deployment pipelines, right, to do this?
Yes, but when we want to altering the Power BI report, we are only access to default environment, not any other environment.
Yeah, I think with Power Automate, you're right. I don't think there's any evidence of us changing that, because in our perspective, you should be using Power, what is it called? The deployment pipelines. I think that's our strategy for Power BI reports, to deploy them through to the various stages of you doing software development. So I'm not sure if I'm giving you a good answer, because I'm struggling to understand why you're using Power Automate here versus deployment pipelines. But what I would invite you to do, can you please send me an email? My email was on the first slide. I will just type my email address in the chat here. Okay. Can you please send me an email, because I would like to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and why, to see if there's something on the roadmap for you. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
There we go. So there is one question here. Do you see Power BI self-service basics as something we should be trying to teach all staff who make decisions, or do you think the complexity is too much for some people? Will visual calculation change that?
So I think in general, if we want to, like, Power BI wants to be the PowerPoint for data, right? So really, if you train all of your users who make decisions, all of your staff, to use something like PowerPoint, you should train them in Power BI. And we need, as a product, we need to do a good job that training is not heavy and as easy as possible. So my answer would be an absolute yes, with the connotation that we as a product need to do better to make that an easier on-ramp, because we recognize the learning curve for Power BI is steep. So that's basically where I think my mindset currently at. The complexity of Power BI is arguably pretty high, but if you look at a tool like Excel, that complexity is even higher. But not a lot of people use Excel to the fullest. Like we know from research, most people only use like 12% of the features in Excel. With Power BI, you need to touch all those features to do what you need. So that's where we need to do better. But in general, Power BI is not more complex than Excel. Absolutely not. If you want to learn everything about Excel, there's a whole world out there that is so much more powerful and complicated than Power BI. Also, keep in mind that people always automatically learn Excel and PowerPoint and Word to some extent as they grow up on schools, etc. Power BI is not there because it's not as ingrained yet into our normal, quote unquote. It's very hard to label something normal, so always something I want to not do, but normal education, right? Most of the people on the planet know Excel when they get out of school somehow. So that base knowledge of that is already ingrained into everybody. That same base knowledge is not ingrained into everybody for Power BI, and we need to change that. So that's basically where I think we are with that. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
It's definitely need that we recognize to make things easier, to make things more accessible. We want to be the PowerPoint for data. That's not only putting Power BI into the Office application and installer. It also means making it easier for you to use, so it's not as daunting to people. So that's definitely a big investment area for all of us.
And the Power BI will be still part of the Power Platform, not part of the Office. Yeah.
Yes.
Because that was the question someone asked me. So what's happened? Do they want to change that? Because in most of the area, you can say the Power Platform with Power App, Power Automate, and other things, but the Power BI is a little bit separate from them. I know they have a different team, different vice president and everything, but still part of the Power Platform.
Yes. I mean, it's not going to suddenly be called, I don't know, Office BI or whatever, right? But it will basically show up where it makes most sense. So it will be both, right? It will be there where you need it, where you expect it. You expect it in Office, that's where we'll be. We'll just show up wherever we feel like we should be. And I don't think we should not be part of, like if we ship in Office doesn't mean we have to leave the Power Platform, and the reverse, right? If we stay in Power Platform doesn't mean we cannot ship in Office. I think we can have both.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jay, for
no worries.
Accepting my invitation, sharing your knowledge, sharing your time with us. And I apologize for the previous one, which I had to cancel that and postpone it to today. So that's happened because of those situation. You're already aware of that one. Thank you for joining us, and hope we can have another session maybe in 6 months or 7 months when the next release plan is ready. Then we can have another one and review those items.
Yes, of course. And can I just say thank you all for joining, and can I say thank you all for being part of our community, because and I don't think we appreciate it enough, but you are the ones that make us build this product. You are the ones that give us jobs. You are the ones that make us happy to go to work, because we know the stuff that we build is adding value to your lives. And for us, that gives us, myself, meaning in my life, right? I also want to thank you for that. Like, you being part of this user group and community is just hugely important for us to do a good job and to excite us and inspire us to do the best job that we can. So we might be building the product, we might be writing it and thinking it, but you're actually the one that is inspiring us to build it. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Thank you. So, okay, so thank you, everyone, and hope to see you soon. Oh, that was it. Hand raised.
I thought it was the last
1 sec.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Maybe Madi was just giving me a high five. I think maybe that was
maybe like
trying to do.
Boom.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
all.
Have a good one.